Today I'm going to tell you a story so dangerous it defied an entire frontier, set in the brutal, wind-scarred Wild West, where love could get you hanged and mercy could get you killed. This is where a broken widow and a hunted Cheyenne warrior crossed paths in a land ruled by guns and fear. It all started with a blizzard and a bleeding stranger. One small choice that would ignite a war of hearts, loyalty, and survival. Before we kick off this adventure, don't forget to hit like on the video and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Blood streaked the snow as Willa Boone clutched the rifle, her trembling fingers slick with frost. The blizzard howled around the small ranch, the wind screaming like wild beasts loose across the plains. 6 long months of widowhood had hardened her soul, but nothing could have prepared her for the sight of the man lying wounded on the edge of her land. "Don't move," she warned, leveling the rifle. The figure in the snow lifted his head, his eyes dark as obsidian, proud yet filled with pain. He was a Cheyenne warrior. Long black hair whipped across his face. His buckskin clothing, decorated with beads and feathers, left no doubt who he was. Blood poured from a gash at his side, staining the white snow crimson. "Soldiers," he rasped in clear English before his knees buckled. Willa hesitated. Folks in Silas Reed's store had been whispering that natives were raiding farms west of Canyon Creek. Yet something in this man's gaze made her lower the rifle just a little. "Were you one of those who attacked the Hendersons?" she asked, her voice tight. "I don't attack women or children," he replied, his voice faint. "They killed my people, burned the camp." The storm thickened, swallowing sound. Willa knew no soul could survive the night out there, not even a warrior carved from the rock and wind of Wyoming. "What's your name?" she asked quietly. "In your tongue," he murmured. "They call me Kael Tazhin." It suited him. Wild, solitary, wounded, she sighed, lowering the gun. "Get up. You can stay in the barn until the storm passes." He gave her a look of disbelief, then nodded once. She helped him rise, his weight heavy against her shoulder, as they fought through the drifts toward the barn, the snow swallowing their tracks as soon as they were made. The barn offered little more than walls against the screaming wind. Still, it was life compared to dying out there. Willa lit an oil lamp. The faint glow flickered over his face. Up close, he was a man of fierce beauty, sharp cheekbones, a jaw carved in stone, eyes that carried entire lifetimes. "Do you have a name, white woman?" he asked as she fetched rags and water. "Willa Boone," she answered softly. "You live alone here, Willa Boone?" "Since my husband Hank died last spring. Fever took him. No children." She didn't know why she told him. Maybe because it had been months since she'd spoken more than a few words to anyone but the pastor or the merchants in town. "Your husband left you this land?" Kael's brow furrowed. "Can white women own land?" "Ownin' it's one thing," she said, pressing the cloth to his wound. "Keepin' it's another. The bank wants it. The neighbors think I can't run it alone." He studied her with something close to respect. "You're like a wolf guarding her den." She ignored the comment. "I need to clean this proper. Don't move." When she returned with warm water, Kael was on his feet, inspecting her tools, assessing everything like a soldier taking measure of the field. "If you plan to use anything in here as a weapon," she warned, "know that I'm quicker than I look." "If I wished to kill you, Willa Boone," he said evenly, "I wouldn't need iron to do it." A chill ran through her, but she kept her voice steady. "Take off your shirt. I need to see the wound." He obeyed. Beneath the lamplight, his chest was a map of scars and faded paint. The new wound was deep, a bayonet cut. Mercer's riders, he muttered. Captain Holt Mercer promised peace if we surrendered. When we laid down our weapons, he ordered the slaughter. Willa cleaned in silence. She'd heard Marshal Clay Vance and others call Mercer a hero. You don't believe me, Kael said without accusation. I don't know what to believe anymore, she admitted. Too many men telling too many versions of the truth. Outside, the storm battered the walls. A crash above made her flinch. The roof sagged under snow. Your shelter is weak, Kael observed. Like the rest of this ranch, she said bitterly. Hank was never much for fixing things, and since he's been gone... They fell silent. She finished bandaging him, both aware that beyond those walls, two worlds were still at war, and neither could win. Why do you help me, white woman? Kael asked at last. Your people would hunt me like an animal. Maybe I'm tired of death, she said softly. Or maybe my father was right. Maybe there's something sacred in everyone, no matter their skin. Your God lives in many mouths, he said darkly, but not many hearts. Night deepened. Willa spread hay and a few blankets. You'll sleep here. I'll come back at first light if the storm lets me. As she reached the door, his voice stopped her. Willa Boone, you don't need to fear this warrior. For the first time that night, she believed him. The snow outside had turned into a pale silence by dawn. Willa Boone fastened her coat and glanced toward the barn, her mind already racing. Helping a Cheyenne could cost her everything if the Canyon Creek folks ever found out. But the decision had already been made. Somewhere deep inside, something long buried had awakened. Something she thought had died with Hank. The storm had passed, leaving a strange stillness over the ranch. She packed bread, dried meat, and a little coffee into a bundle. Her hand paused at the rifle cabinet, but she left it untouched. If Kael Tazhin had meant her harm, she wouldn't be alive to worry about it. Snow reached her knees as she trudged toward the barn. The door creaked under her hand. Kael was awake, sitting upright on a bed of hay. His movements were calm, but his eyes, sharp, alert, tracked every motion she made. You're still here, she said quietly. I said my fight isn't with those who offer shelter, he replied. I brought food, Willa said, setting the bundle on a bale. Kael inclined his head in silent thanks, a gesture that carried pride rather than submission. The morning light revealed his face, strong, lined with hardship, yet marked by a quiet nobility. Beneath that strength lingered grief, carved deep as the scars across his skin. The storm's cleared, she said, pouring coffee into 2 mugs. But the road to town's likely blocked. Better that way, Kael muttered. The white soldiers still hunt me. He sniffed the coffee before tasting it, then took a cautious sip. Your roof won't last another winter, he remarked, eyeing the sagging beams. I know, Willa sighed. A lot around here needs fixing. Hank was never much for repairs, and there's only so much a woman can manage alone. Kael studied her, his tone steady. Why not go back to your kin? A young woman shouldn't live out here by herself. I've got no kin, she said flatly. My parents are gone. Hank's gone too. There's no one left. Silence filled the barn, broken only by the wind whining through the cracks. Willa knelt beside him. Let me check your wound. As she unwrapped the bandage, she saw the other marks that mapped his body. Bullet scars, burns, deep cuts. A life written in pain and survival. You've fought a long time, she murmured. As long as I can remember, Kael answered. First the Crow, then the Sioux, then your soldiers with their blue coats and empty promises. Not all white men are like that, she argued gently. No? His gaze hardened. Your people stole our lands, killed our buffalo, broke every promise they ever made. Even those without rifles live off what was taken. His words cut through her like the cold wind. She couldn't deny them. I didn't choose to be born white, just as you didn't choose to be Cheyenne. But I'm still trying to help you. Kael's eyes softened with something like confusion. Why? Because my father taught me that a person's worth comes from what they do, not what they are. He opened his mouth to respond, but a loud crack from above split the air. The roof groaned, and a heavy beam crashed down. Willa gasped as Kael lunged forward, grabbing her arm and pulling her clear of the falling wood. For a moment, they stood inches apart, breath mingling in the frigid air, the heat of his touch burning through her sleeve. She pulled back quickly, her heart racing. I'll fix it, Kael said, eyeing the damaged roof. If the snow melts through, you'll lose your tools and feed. You're hurt, she protested. I've had worse, he replied simply. Show me where you keep your timber. Against every instinct, she led him to the shed. He inspected each board with careful hands, selecting what would hold. Why are you doing this? She asked quietly. A debt for a debt, he said. You saved my life. I'll save your barn. They worked side by side for hours. Willa handed him nails and tools. He hammered with steady strength. Each time their hands brushed, something unspoken passed between them. Something neither dared name, yet both could feel stirring beneath the cold Wyoming sky. The cold was settling deep again by the time Tazhin fastened the last plank in place. His movements were steady, precise, each strike of the hammer sure, deliberate. Where did you learn to do that? Willa Boone asked, watching the warrior's skill with quiet awe. I watched white builders on the reservation, he replied, his tone calm but edged with memory. You learn fast when your life depends on it. When the sun sank behind the ridge, the roof stood solid again, better than it had been in years. Willa looked up at it, admiration softening her tired features. Thank you, she said sincerely. That would have taken me weeks alone. Kael nodded once, his face caught in the last red glow of sunset. Come to the house, Willa said impulsively. It's freezing out here, and that wound won't heal without heat. His jaw tightened instantly. I will not step into a white man's house. It's my home now, she countered firmly, and I'd rather not see my patient freeze to death after fixing my roof. Their eyes met, two wills clashing in silence. Finally, Kael inclined his head slightly. Just for tonight, he said. They walked side by side through the snow toward the cabin. The wind bit at their faces, and Willa felt a strange unease, like she was crossing a boundary she'd never find her way back from. Her cabin was small but warm. The fire crackled in the stone hearth, casting amber light over the room. Kael paused at the threshold, his shoulders tense. There's nothing to fear here, Willa said softly, hanging her shawl on a hook. It's not fear, he replied. It's respect for the spirits that live within each home. He stepped inside quietly, his eyes sweeping the space, the worn Bible on the table, the wooden furniture, a faded wedding photograph in a simple frame. Sit, Willa offered. I'll get you something hot. As she worked the stove, she could feel his gaze following her every move. The silence between them was heavy, but not hostile, like two storms circling the same sky. Your people, she said after a moment. Where are they now? Kael's face hardened. Those who survived fled north into the mountains. The rest were taken. I'll find them when I'm strong enough. And your family? She asked, setting down 2 bowls of stew. I have none, he said quietly. My father was a war chief. He fell protecting our village 2 winters ago. Willa sat across from him. I'm sorry, she whispered. Kael studied her. What of your man? How did he die? Fever, she said, surprised at how easily the words came now. It started as a cough. Then the night sweats came and weakness. He was gone in 2 weeks. Was he a good man? The question startled her. No one in Canyon Creek had ever asked that. Yes, she said finally. He was kind, never raised a hand to me. But this ranch, it was more his dream than mine. He didn't know much about cattle or crops. We were always one debt away from losing everything. Kael nodded, as if he understood too well. White men's dreams often cost more than they can pay. They finished the stew in silence. The wind outside began to howl again, shaking the windows. Another storm's coming, Willa said, gathering the bowls. I'm glad you fixed the roof. As she passed him, Kael reached out gently, his fingers closing around her wrist. The touch was brief, yet fire shot through her veins. You have strong hands, he said quietly. Stronger than most white women. Willa froze, then pulled back, her breath uneven. Ranch life requires it, she muttered, retreating to the kitchen. As she washed the dishes, confusion pressed in on her chest. Since Hank's death, she'd shut her heart off completely, promising herself she'd never depend on any man again. Yet this stranger, this warrior from a people her own called the enemy, had stirred something alive inside her she thought long dead. When she returned, Kael was standing before the fire, gazing at the wedding photograph. You were young, he said softly. 17, Willa replied. Hank was 22. We married after 2 months. In my tribe, Kael said, the young must prove themselves before they marry. She smiled faintly. It's not so different here. Men prove their worth with land and cattle. Women, with obedience and children. Kael turned toward her, his voice low and deliberate. And where, he asked, does your worth lie, Willa Boone? His eyes, sharp, unreadable, searched hers as if trying to uncover something she wasn't even sure she understood herself. I'm still figuring that out, Willa Boone admitted quietly, surprised at her own honesty. Outside, the wind roared harder, flinging snow against the windows like angry fists. You can sleep here, she said at last, pointing toward a small space by the hearth, where she had spread blankets and a pillow. I'll be in my room. There's water in that jug if you need it. She started toward the door, but stopped, glancing back. Kael, she began hesitantly, what's your real name, in your language? He studied her for a long moment, as if deciding whether she had earned the right to hear it. Finally, he said, Kael Tazhin means he who runs with the Great Spirit. That's beautiful, she murmured. Good night, Kael Tazhin. Good night, Willa Boone, he answered. In her room, Willa lay awake for a long time, listening to the crackle of the fire and the soft groan of the wind. She should have been terrified, a wounded warrior from the Red Mesa tribe sleeping beneath her roof. But instead, his presence brought a strange calm she hadn't felt since Hank's death. As sleep crept in, she admitted what she'd tried to deny all day. Something about that man, the quiet power, the dignity, the way his gaze stripped every defense she had, stirred something deep inside her. Something far more dangerous than any blizzard. For the first time in months, Willa drifted to sleep without the heavy ache of loneliness pressing against her chest. When dawn broke, pale light seeped through the frosted glass. Willa woke abruptly, her heart racing as she remembered the stranger sleeping in her house. She dressed quickly and opened the door to the living room. The space was empty. The blankets had been folded neatly beside the cold fireplace. He was gone. A sharp pang hit her chest. Of course he'd leave, she whispered to herself. What did you expect, Willa? That a wounded Apache warrior would stay on a white widow's ranch? Still, her eyes swept the horizon until they landed on the barn. The door stood slightly ajar. Pulling her shawl tight, she trudged through the snow. The steady sound of wood being worked reached her before she stepped inside. Kael was crouched in the center of the barn, focused, sharpening the edge of a board. The air smelled of sawdust and cold iron. "I thought you were gone," Willa said softly. "Not yet," Kael replied without looking up. "What are you doing?" "Your barn has more troubles than the roof," he said, nodding toward a section of rotted flooring. "When the thaw comes, this'll flood. You'll lose your feed." Willa blinked, surprised. Part of the floor had already been replaced, each plank straight and fitted tight. "You didn't have to do that," she said, her voice low. "The debt isn't paid," Kael answered simply. A quiet peace settled between them as he worked. She watched his hands, strong, deliberate, every movement efficient. There was something mesmerizing about him, about the stillness he carried even while working. "How's your wound?" she asked after a while. "Healing," he said, adjusting a board. His movements were still careful, but stronger than before. "I'll make breakfast," she offered. "You must be starving." He gave a faint nod, his dark eyes following her as she left. In the kitchen, Willa cooked eggs and warmed bread, her thoughts tangled. For months, she'd lived by the same rhythm: wake, work, sleep, survive. But now everything felt different. His presence disrupted the quiet walls she'd built around her heart, and she couldn't tell if she wanted them back. When she returned to the barn with a small tray, Kael was examining a rusted plow in the corner. "That won't hold another season," he said, tapping the corroded blade. "I know," Willa sighed, setting down the tray. "But I can't afford a new one. Without it, I won't plant enough to last the winter." Kael turned, his gaze thoughtful. "Is your land good?" "Decent," she replied. "Better for grazing than crops. But raising cattle alone is near impossible." "Then why stay?" he asked simply. The question hit harder than she expected. She'd asked herself the same thing 100 nights. "Because I've got nowhere else to go," she said quietly. "And because, despite everything, this is home." They ate in silence, both lost in thought. Then Kael looked up, his tone suddenly grave. "When the trail's clear," he said, "Mercer's riders will come looking for me." A chill ran through Willa Boone's spine, one that had little to do with the morning cold. "How do you know they'll come?" she asked quietly. Kael Tazhin's gaze met hers, dark and steady. "Because there's a bounty for any Apache found off the reservation," he said, "especially me." Her brow furrowed. "Why especially you?" He hesitated, as if weighing how much of himself to reveal. "Because I know their secrets. I worked as a guide for Mercer's riders before they realized how much English I understood. I heard their plans, the truth behind their talk of peace." "What kind of plans?" she pressed. His jaw tightened. "Mining on sacred lands, deals with the railroads, and finally, the plan to erase what's left of my people." Willa felt those words land heavy, like stones in her gut. The stories she'd heard in Canyon Creek painted a different picture, one of savages and soldiers, not broken promises and betrayal. "When the snow melts," Kael said after a pause, "I'll have to leave. Staying here puts your life in danger." Something inside her rebelled at the thought, sharp and sudden. "Where will you go?" she asked, her voice trembling just a little. "North," he said, "to find the survivors of my tribe." "Alone? With patrols crawling everywhere?" Kael's eyes caught hers, dark fire behind calm restraint. "I've walked alone all my life, Willa Boone. Loneliness is an old friend." And in that moment, under the pale light slipping through the cracks of the barn, she saw something familiar in him. the same ache that lived inside her. "Fix what you can today," she said abruptly, rising to her feet. "Tomorrow we'll see what comes." She walked toward the house, but his gaze followed her like a shadow. Warm, steady, impossible to ignore. Something between them had changed, and both could feel it. By sundown, the barn roof was finished. The golden light of dusk spilled across the valley, and Willa stood on her porch, hugging herself against the chill wind blowing from the west. The last few days had changed everything. Her ranch, her routine, her heart. The snow was melting now, turning the trails into rivers of mud. Soon, they'd be passable again. "You're worried," came Kael's deep voice from behind her. She didn't turn. "The roads will open in a few days," she said softly. "Silas Reed always brings the first supply wagon through, and he spreads news faster than wildfire." Kael stepped up beside her, his profile etched in the amber light. The wound at his side had nearly healed. Just a faint line now. In 3 days, he'd done more repairs around the ranch than Hank had managed in 2 years. "I owe you more than I can ever repay," Willa murmured. "There's no debt," he said simply. "Only choices." Their eyes met, and for a moment the air between them seemed to hum. The pull was dangerous, stronger than fear, stronger than reason. "Come inside," she said finally. "The night's turning cold." In the kitchen, the smell of stew filled the room. They ate as they had the past few nights. In silence, the kind that didn't feel empty, but alive. "Tell me about your people," Willa said at last. "Your customs, your stories." Kael watched her carefully, then began to speak. His voice was low, rich, full of memory. He told her of buffalo hunts under the red sun, of sacred fires, and the constellations the Red Mesa tribe believed were the spirits of their ancestors. "The old ones say the stars guide us," he said. "They are those who walked before us, watching from the dark sky." "My father used to say something like that," Willa replied, "that those we love never really leave." Kael nodded. "He sounds like a wise man." She gave a small, wistful smile. "He was a preacher, a hard one. After my mother died, he drank too much, but he taught me to read, to think. Things most men think women shouldn't do." "In my tribe," Kael said, "women are honored for their wisdom. Some are healers. Some guard the stories of our ancestors." "It's not that way here," Willa sighed. "A widow without children doesn't count for much, except for whatever land she owns." Kael's eyes narrowed. "Is that why the man from the bank wants your ranch?" Willa's head snapped up. "How do you know about him?" "You talk in your sleep," Kael said, a faint smile ghosting across his lips. "2 nights ago, during the storm, I checked to make sure you were safe. You called his name, angry." Her cheeks flushed. "Kael Redden," she muttered. "He's waiting for me to fail so he can take this place for what I owe." "And will you let him?" Kael asked. "Not if I can help it," she said, her voice low but fierce. "But without help comes spring." Her words trailed off. Kael stared into the fire for a long moment. "When I leave," he said quietly, "I'll leave the repaired plow behind. It'll last you 1 more season." The mention of his departure made her chest tighten painfully. It shouldn't hurt. He was a stranger, a man from another world. But the thought of this place without him felt unbearable. "Thank you," she whispered, and her voice caught on the edge of something she couldn't name. After supper, they stayed by the hearth. Willa Boone reached for a worn little book resting on the mantel. "I used to read this to Hank on long winter nights," she said softly. "He liked it, though he'd never admit it to the men in town. So hard ton toitas." "Would you read to me?" Kael Tazhin asked, catching her off guard. She hesitated, then opened the book. Leaves of Grass by Walt Whitman. Her gentle voice filled the quiet room, the verses speaking of earth, spirit, and the bond between all living things. When she glanced up, Kael's gaze was fixed, not on the pages, but on her. "The words are strong," he murmured when she paused. "But your voice, it gives them breath." Willa closed the book, her pulse quickening. The air between them felt charged, humming with something unspoken. "In another life," she began uncertainly. "There is no other life," Kael interrupted, his tone low, deliberate. "Only this one, and the choices we make in it." His hand rose slowly, brushing her cheek, so light it was almost a question. Willa should have pulled away, should have remembered the walls that divided their worlds. Instead, she closed her eyes and leaned into the warmth of his touch. Then came the sound, distant hooves pounding through the snow. Kael stiffened. "Horses. 3, maybe 4. Her breath caught. "No one rides this late unless—" "They're hunting," he finished grimly, already reaching for his coat. "You have to hide," Willa insisted, panic rising. "They'll check the barn first." "The cellar," Kael said. His eyes flicked towards the trap door beneath the kitchen floor, the same space where she stored her winter potatoes. The thunder of hooves drew closer. The fragile world they had built these last few days began to collapse around them. Kael descended into the dark cellar without another word. For a heartbeat, their eyes met. Fear, trust, and something deeper flickering between them. "Don't make a sound," she whispered, pulling the trap door shut and dragging the old rug over it. Moments later, a thunderous knock rattled the door. Willa smoothed her apron, forced a steady breath, and opened it. "Mrs. Boone," came the gravelly voice of Marshal Clay Vance, his broad frame filling the doorway. Behind him, 2 riders waited, their horses restless in the cold. "Marshal," she greeted, summoning a nervous smile. "What brings you out this late?" "Concern, ma'am," he replied, stepping inside. "The storms had everyone snowed in. Some of the Canyon Creek folks were worried about you out here alone." His sharp eyes swept over the cabin. "Mind if I come in? It's a cold night." "Of course. I just put coffee on," she said, forcing calm. The marshal removed his hat, thick mustache twitching as he studied the room. Outside, one deputy dismounted while the other checked the barn. "I see your roof's been mended," Vance noted, accepting the steaming cup she handed him. "Fine work for one person." "I had time during the storm," Willa replied evenly. "Seemed better than sitting idle." He eyed her over the rim of his mug. "There have been reports of fugitive Apache in the area. They attacked Captain Holt Mercer's unit up north and vanished into the hills." Her heartbeat thudded, but her face remained still. "I haven't seen anyone pass through," she said quietly. "Captain Mercer wants one in particular," the marshal continued. "A warrior called Lone Wolf, or something close. Dangerous sort. Used to guide our army, then turned on them." A tremor went through her. "Why tell me this?" "Because I'm checking every remote property," he said. "These men are clever. Might seek shelter, steal food, or worse." His eyes narrowed. "Keep your rifle loaded, Mrs. Boone." "I always do." Just then, one deputy stepped inside, stomping snow off his boots. "Marshal, there are fresh prints near the barn. Someone's been out there." Vance turned to her, brow arched. "I told you," she said calmly. "I did some repairs." The other deputy, Roy Tate, a younger man with a crooked grin, chuckled. "A woman fixing a roof in a blizzard? Now that I'd pay to see?" "Frontier women are tougher than most men realize, Mr. Tate," Willa replied, lifting her chin. Vance set the cup down and rose slowly. "I don't doubt your grit, Mrs. Boone," he said, voice heavy with suspicion. "But I've noticed a few strange things out here." "What kind of strange things?" Willa Boone asked, her throat tightening. Marshal Clay Vance set his jaw. 2 coffee cups in the sink, 2 sets of silverware, a pair of men's boots leaving wet prints by your hearth. His eyes swept across the room, sharp as a hawk's. And that open book, unless you've taken to reading poetry to your walls, suggests you had company. Willa's pulse froze. How could she have been so careless? "My husband," she began. "Has been dead 6 months," Vance cut in, his tone flat. "Now, I've no quarrel with a widow finding comfort again, but I need to know who was here." The 2 deputies exchanged wary glances. One rested his hand casually on his revolver. "It was Jed Crow, from the neighboring ranch," Willa lied quickly, grasping at the first name that came to mind. "He came to check on me after the storm, helped with the roof." "Crow's been bedridden with fever for a week," Vance said, his eyes narrowing. "You should choose your lies more carefully." His voice hardened. "Harboring an Indian fugitive is a federal crime, Mrs. Boone." The words hung in the air like a noose. Fear clawed at her chest, but something fierce burned beneath it. Defiance. She would not betray Kael Tazhin, not after what he had told her about Captain Holt Mercer, not after the trust they had built in these fleeting days. "Search the place," Vance ordered curtly. "House, barn, stable, every inch." Willa stood frozen as the men began overturning furniture, opening cupboards, checking beneath her bed. The marshal's cold blue eyes stayed locked on her, reading every flicker in her expression. "There's no need for this," she managed, her voice trembling. "It's for your own safety," Vance replied smoothly. "These savages are deceitful. If you're hiding one out of fear, say the word, and I'll see you protected." Minutes crawled by like hours. Willa's hands clasped tightly before her to hide their shaking. Her eyes avoided the old rug covering the cellar trap door. She couldn't risk even a glance. "Nothing in the barn but tools and some damn fine carpentry," called Roy Tate as he re-entered. "Stable's clear too," added Eli Danner, brushing snow from his coat. Vance frowned, unconvinced. "Seems we owe you an apology, Mrs. Boone," he said, though his tone carried no warmth. "Still, stay alert." "I will, Marshal," she answered, her knees nearly buckling with relief. The men began to leave, boots thudding across the wooden floor, until Vance stopped abruptly. His gaze had landed on the corner of the kitchen rug, slightly askew. "That rug looks out of place," he remarked casually. Willa's heart lurched. Her pulse thundered so loud she was sure he could hear it. The marshal took a slow step forward, suspicion sharpening his face. "Something wrong with the floor, Mrs. Boone?" "Just a mouse," she said quickly. "Been hearing it for days. I set traps, but no luck." Vance nudged the rug with the toe of his boot. Willa's blood turned to ice, just below his feet. Mere inches away, Kael was hidden in the darkness, holding his breath. "Rats cause a heap of trouble, especially in winter," Vance muttered, crouching down to lift the edge of the rug. Before he could pull it back, a voice called from outside. "Marshal, found something!" Vance froze, looking from Willa to the rug. After a long moment he straightened and strode toward the porch. Willa followed, her breath shallow. "What is it?" the marshal barked. Roy Tate pointed at the snow. "Tracks, 2 sets. One's boots, the other's moccasins." Vance's eyes darkened as he turned to Willa. "Looks like we've got ourselves a problem, Mrs. Boone." "They're probably old," she said, her voice thin. "Natives used to hunt through here. My husband allowed it, if they stayed off the pasture." "These prints are fresh," Tate insisted. "Maybe today, yesterday at most." Vance adjusted his gun belt. "Let's check the basement." Willa stepped in front of the kitchen door. "That won't be necessary, Marshal. I told you, I'm alone." "Then you won't mind if we look," he said, pushing past her. Her throat went dry, but fighting him now would only make things worse. She followed numbly as they entered the kitchen. Vance bent down and yanked the rug aside, revealing the old trapdoor. He gripped the rusty iron ring and pulled. The door creaked open. Willa held her breath as he struck a match and peered into the shadows. Potatoes, canning jars, firewood stacked neatly in the corner. Nothing more. "See?" she said, her voice surprisingly steady. Vance frowned, puzzled. He stepped down a few creaking steps, sweeping the flickering light around. "I don't understand," he muttered. "The tracks lead right here." "Like I said, they're probably old," Willa Boone answered, forcing calm into her trembling voice. Inside, though, her mind spun in panic. Where had Kael gone? Marshal Clay, Vance grunted, lowering himself into the cellar. The wooden boards creaked under his boots. "My apologies for the trouble, Mrs. Boone," he said, striking another match to look around. "But I've got a duty to keep the good folks of these hills safe." "I understand, Marshal," she managed, leading them towards the door. "Good evening, gentlemen." When their horses finally disappeared into the dark, Willa shut the door and leaned against it, shaking from head to toe. Seconds later, a soft rustle outside. Her hand flew to the rifle. She opened the door cautiously, the night air biting her cheeks. "Are they gone?" came a low voice from the shadows. Her breath caught. "Kael." He stepped out of the dark, snow clinging to his coat. "They won't stay fooled for long." Where did you hide?" she asked, bewildered. "There's a hollow between the outer wall and the earth," he explained quietly, slipping inside. "A place only those who've learned to vanish can find." She bolted the door behind him. "They found your tracks," she whispered. "I know." His tone was grave. "They'll come back, with more men." The truth struck her like a hammer. She'd lied to a marshal, sheltered a fugitive, defied the law of the territory. The punishment could ruin her. Or worse. "I should leave," Kael said finally. "Tonight, while the dark still favors us." "No." The word tore from her before she could stop it. "It's too dangerous. They might still be watching." He stepped closer, his voice low. "Why do you risk so much for me, Willa Boone? You know what'll happen if they find me here." Her eyes fell away, her heart pounding. "I don't know," she whispered. "Maybe because, for the first time since Hank died, I don't feel so damn alone." Kyle's hand rose, gently turning her face toward him. "When I was a boy," he said softly, "my people told stories of spirits destined to find one another, no matter how far apart their worlds were." "And what happens when those spirits meet?" she breathed. "They never part again." The distance between them vanished. His lips brushed hers, soft at first, then deep, desperate, alive. Her hands found his shoulders, feeling the raw strength beneath the scars. When they finally pulled apart, Willa knew her life had just shifted on its axis. The walls she'd built around her heart were gone. "I'll stay until dawn," Kael murmured. "Then I must go." Willa nodded, though her chest ached with protest. "Where will you go?" "North," he said, "to find the rest of the Mesa Ridge tribe. But now—" His gaze softened. "I'll carry a part of you with me, Willa Boone." That night, under the faint light of the moon, Willa understood that nothing in her world would ever be the same. The Apache warrior had rebuilt more than her barn. He'd awakened something she thought was dead. The courage to feel, to trust, to love. And with that came a heavier truth. She couldn't stand by and watch him vanish into the wild alone. When dawn came, purple streaking the horizon, gold glinting on the frost, Kael readied his pack by the corral. Willa stood on the porch, arms wrapped tight around herself, watching him tie the last strap. They hadn't slept. Instead, they'd spoken in low whispers through the night, sharing stories, fears, and silences that said more than words ever could. "The Dry Creek Trail will take you past the Henderson land," she said, handing him a small hand-drawn map. "Avoid the main roads. The marshal will have men waiting." Kael nodded, slipping the map into his coat. His gaze swept the ranch one last time before resting on her. "You've done more for me than anyone has in many winters," he said quietly. Her throat tightened. "Then let me do one more thing," she blurted. He frowned. "What are you saying?" "I'm going with you," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. His brow furrowed. "That's madness. The trail is dangerous." "It'll be worse if I stay," she argued. "When Vance comes back, he'll find proof. They'll know I sheltered you. And a white woman who helps an Apache?" She didn't need to finish. Kyle's eyes darkened. "And your ranch? All you fought for?" Willa glanced toward the small house, the barn he'd repaired, the fences Hank once built. "It's just land," she said. "There's more of it beyond those mountains, but only one life to live." For a long moment, Kael said nothing. Then, finally, he nodded. "Take only what you need. Nothing that'll slow us down." Willa already had a bundle ready. Some clothes, her father's worn Bible, her mother's locket, and the few coins she'd saved at the bottom of a flour tin. 15 minutes later, she was dressed in her late husband's work trousers beneath her long skirt. Something Hank would have scolded her for, but something the wilderness would demand. Before stepping outside, Willa Boone took one last look at the wedding portrait resting above the hearth. For a long moment she simply stared, at the painted smile of the man she once loved, at the life that had already turned to ash. Then, with quiet finality, she slipped the photograph from its frame and left it on the table. That chapter was over. A new one had begun. The first light of dawn spilled faintly across the plains as they left the ranch, keeping to the back fence line to avoid the main trail. Willa led her lone horse by the reins, carrying only what was necessary. Tazhin moved ahead, silent and sure-footed, his sharp gaze sweeping the land and sky with instinctive precision. "We ride until noon," he said in that low, even tone of his. "After that we'll walk. Lead the horse. Fewer tracks." Willa nodded, a strange mix of fear and exhilaration stirring in her chest. It was the first time she'd been so far from Canyon Creek since arriving years ago with Hank Boone. The land grew wilder with every mile, the soft prairie grass giving way to stone and pine, the wind sharpening as it swept down from the northern ridges. When they stopped beneath a cliff to rest the horse, Kyle's shadow flickered against the rocks. "Why risk everything for me?" he asked quietly. Willa hesitated, watching clouds roll fast across the winter sky. "All my life, I've done what others expected of me. Daughter, wife, widow. I'm done living a life that isn't mine." "It's a hard road," he warned. "So was the last one," she said softly, a faint smile ghosting her lips. They moved on in silence, the world narrowing to wind, hoofbeats, and the steady rhythm of their steps. For Willa, every stride felt like both a farewell and a beginning, the closing of one life, and the fragile birth of another. By noon, they stopped again to water the horse. Kael suddenly stiffened, his entire body going still. He lifted a hand, a wordless signal. "What is it?" she whispered. "Horses," he murmured. "3, maybe 4. From the east." Her heart jumped. "Marshal Vance?" He shook his head. "Don't know. Come." They led the horse behind a ridge, crouching low among the brush. Moments later, the sound of hooves drew close. "Must have been here," said a voice, one that made Willa's stomach turn to ice. Jed Crow, the neighbor she'd claimed was sick in bed. "The widow's always been odd," another man sneered. "The marshal's paying for the savage, but I hear the woman's worth just as much, now that she's helping him." Kael's hand brushed hers, steady, silent reassurance. The riders passed less than 30 feet away, unaware of the two figures hidden behind stone and pine. Only when their voices faded into the distance did Willa finally breathe again. "Now we're both fugitives," she whispered. Kael's lips twitched in a faint grin. "I've been one all my life," he said. "Now I just have company." They pressed on, cautious and quiet, skirting every road and fence line. By sunset, they reached a narrow valley where a small stream trickled between rocks. "We'll make camp here," Kael decided. "Good water, and we can see anyone who comes near." Willa helped gather dry twigs, while Kael built a lean shelter from pine branches. Watching him move, strong, sure, efficient, she felt a deep certainty settle inside her. She had made the right choice. For the first time in years, she wasn't merely surviving. She was living. "What happens when we find your people?" she asked as the fire flickered, its light soft against the stone. Kael looked up at the first stars appearing over the ridgeline. "First, we survive long enough to reach them." 2 weeks later, most of the snow had melted. The mountains loomed ahead, their dark peaks cutting through the gray sky. The air was thin and cold, scented with pine and damp earth. Willa's legs ached with every climb. "We need to stop soon," she said. "It's getting dark." Kael nodded. "There's shelter up ahead, a rock ledge. It'll block the wind." They worked wordlessly, falling into the rhythm they'd built through days of hardship. Willa built a small, hidden fire, while Kael tended the horse. "Food's running low," she said, counting what was left, a handful of dried meat and cornmeal. "Maybe one more day's worth. I'll hunt tomorrow," he replied, lowering himself beside her. "Saw deer tracks on the trail?" She studied his face in the firelight, the quiet strength, the calm beneath it. She had learned his silences, the way a slight tightening around his eyes meant worry, the rare softness that hinted at hope. "You're concerned," she said. Kael watched the flames flicker before answering. "They haven't stopped following us. Yesterday I saw smoke to the south, a camp, still tracking us." "For them," he said, his voice quiet but fierce. "This isn't just about us. It's about the war they think never ended." The fire crackled softly between them, the only sound in the mountain silence. "It's not just about us," Tazhin said quietly, his gaze fixed on the flames. "It's what we represent, a warrior of the Red Mesa tribe and a white woman riding side by side. That alone defies everything they believe in." The words hung heavy between them. Willa Boone reached out, her fingers finding his. In the long weeks of their flight, something had taken root, something unspoken but powerful. In every shared glance across the firelight, every lingering brush of hands, every cold night when warmth meant survival, their bond had deepened beyond words. "How long until we find your people?" she asked softly. "If the old trails still hold, 3, maybe 4 days," he replied. Willa's throat tightened. They had never spoken of what would happen when they reached his tribe, whether they'd accept her, a settler woman among those who had every reason to mistrust her kind. "What will you tell them about me?" she asked. Kael turned toward her, the firelight glinting in his dark eyes. "I'll tell them you're Willa, the woman who saved my life, who left everything behind to walk beside me." "And will that be enough?" "For some," he said after a pause. "For others, it'll take time. Trust doesn't grow easy where blood still stains the ground." Silence settled between them again, filled only by the low sigh of the wind. "My father once told me," Willa murmured, "that the same stars shine over every soul, that beneath the night sky we're all equal." Kael's eyes lifted to the heavens. "My people say those stars are our ancestors' eyes," he answered. "They watch our choices. They guide us when the world grows dark." Willa smiled faintly, tightening her hand around his. "Maybe they're both right. Maybe they lead to the same place." A cold wind swept through the clearing. Willa shivered, and Kael wrapped his arm around her shoulders, pulling her close. "Are you afraid?" he asked against her hair. "Not of you," she whispered. "Never of you." "And of what's coming?" She hesitated, then nodded. "I'm afraid they won't accept me, that I'll have no place among your people." He touched her cheek gently. "Among my tribe, we believe that when two spirits are meant to meet, not even the strongest winds of fate can keep them apart." "Do you believe that?" she asked, searching his face. "I didn't," he said quietly. "Not until the day a woman with sky-colored eyes aimed a rifle at me in the snow." She laughed softly. "Not much of a fairy tale beginning?" "But it's ours," he said simply. Their lips met, hesitant at first, then deep and certain. The weeks of running, the hunger, the fear, all of it melted into that moment. Willa's fingers traced the scars along his jaw, memorizing every detail as though she could hold him there forever. "If we'd met in another life," she began. He cut her off gently. "We wouldn't be who we are now, and that's what matters." Then, a sharp crack echoed through the valley. A gunshot. Kael's eyes flashed to the darkness. "Too close," he muttered, already smothering the fire with dirt. They packed quickly, hearts pounding. "Where do we go?" Willa whispered as she climbed onto the horse. "There's a pass north, too narrow for riders. We'll go on foot. It'll give us time." The moon, nearly full, lit their way as they slipped into the forest. Willa looked back once, at the spot where moments ago they'd shared their first true promise. "They'll find our camp," she said quietly. "Yes," Kael replied. "But they won't find us." As they vanished into the dense pines, Willa cast one last glance upward. The same stars that once shone over Canyon Creek, over the ranch she'd called home, now watched over her on this wild and uncertain path, beside the man who had somehow become her fate. When morning came, a veil of mist clung to the mountains. From a ridge above, Willa and Kael looked down upon the valley below, where the Mesa Ridge tribe had made their camp. Dozens of buffalo-hide lodges stood in a great circle, thin plumes of smoke rising toward the pale sky. "There are fewer than there once were," Kael said quietly, pain flickering behind his eyes. "Too many are gone." It had been 3 days since they'd shaken their pursuers, following secret trails only his people would know. Now, less than a mile away, lay both the end of their journey and the start of something neither of them could predict. "How should I introduce myself?" Willa asked, her voice tight with nerves. "As yourself," Kael said, meeting her gaze. "A woman of courage, who chose her own path." They descended the slope slowly. Even before they reached the camp's edge, Willa felt the weight of the stairs upon them. Children pausing their play, women frozen mid-task, warriors emerging from the shadows with cautious, piercing eyes. An old man stepped forward from the crowd, his face carved by time and wisdom. Beads and eagle feathers adorned his robes, glinting in the firelight, a mark of his place among the respected elders. He and Tazhin exchanged a few words in the language of the Red Mesa tribe, sounds soft and rhythmic, like a song carried by the wind. "This is Elder Nantan," Kael said finally, "healer and counselor of the tribe. He asks who you are, the woman who walks beside a warrior of his people." Willa Boone straightened her shoulders, her heart pounding. "Tell him I'm Willa," she said firmly. "A woman who learned that the walls between us live only in the mind." Kael translated, his deep voice steady. The elder studied her for a long moment, his eyes sharp and searching, as though they could see into her very soul. "He says your eyes hold truth," Kael murmured, "but truth alone doesn't guarantee acceptance." By now, more had gathered. Warriors, mothers, children, faces flickering in the firelight, a mix of curiosity, fear, and silent judgment. Then, through the murmuring crowd, an elderly woman appeared, walking with quiet authority. Her hair, streaked with silver, caught the moonlight as she stepped forward. She spoke directly to Kael, her tone low but firm, her hand occasionally gesturing toward Willa. The camp's energy shifted, the voices rising around them. "What is she saying?" Willa whispered. "She is Lonnie Skyfire, my aunt," Kael replied quietly. "She says white people bring only sorrow, that no matter your words, your kind cannot be trusted." Willa's throat tightened. She could feel the centuries of loss and betrayal behind those words. Land stolen, promises broken, blood spilled. How could they not hate her kind? "Tell her this," Willa said clearly, her voice trembling only slightly. "I don't ask to belong. I only want a place where we can live without fear. If that place isn't here, we'll keep moving," Kael translated. The murmurs quieted. Lonnie stepped closer, her sharp gaze locking onto Willa's. She studied her like someone searching for ghosts in another's eyes. "She asks why you turned your back on your own people," Kael said. Willa drew a deep breath. "Because I found truth where I was taught to see only enemies. Because I learned that courage and honor don't belong to one race. And because—" She paused, emotion tightening her chest. "I found love where there should have been hate." Kael spoke the words aloud in his people's tongue, and silence swept across the camp. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Lonnie and Elder Nantan exchanged a look, one that spoke of long memory and quiet understanding. Then, slowly, Lonnie reached out, her weathered hand trembling slightly, and touched Willa's cheek. Her fingers were rough, but the gesture was soft. She said something low, her voice no longer sharp but full of depth. "She says your eyes carry the same grief they all share," Kael translated gently. "She says you have lost much, as we have." Elder Nantan spoke next, his words calm and deliberate. Kael listened. Then his expression softened. "He says the old prophecies tell of a time when people of all colors will walk together again. He believes our meeting might be part of that path." A young woman stepped forward, offering Willa a bowl of water. It was a simple act, yet full of meaning. Willa accepted it, took a sip, then handed it back with a grateful nod. "It's a welcome," Kael said quietly. "Not a promise, but a beginning." That night, as the council fire burned high, Willa sat among the tribe. She couldn't understand their words, but she could feel their weight, the future of her and Kael being debated in every glance and gesture. He sat beside her, their shoulders brushing, both listening to voices rise and fall under the open Wyoming sky. "They're divided," Kael murmured. "Some fear that your presence will bring soldiers to us. Others believe strength comes when paths join." "And you?" she asked softly. "Where does your loyalty lie?" Kael lifted his eyes to the stars before answering. "My loyalty lies with my people," he said. Then, turning to her, he added quietly, "And with you, Willa Boone. You've become part of what I must protect." Elder Nantan rose, lifting a hand for silence, His deep voice rolled through the night like thunder. "He says the camp must move at dawn," Kael translated. "Word has come of soldiers in the southern valleys. We'll head north, beyond the borderlands." "What about us?" Willa asked. "He offers a choice," Kael said softly. "We can go with them, or find our own way. But winter's coming fast. No trail will be easy." Willa looked around. The families huddled close, the children asleep beside the fires, the faces worn by hunger and hardship. Then she turned to Kael, the man who had changed everything she believed about the world. "Then what's our path?" she whispered. Kael reached for her hand, his fingers firm around hers. "Wherever it leads," he said. "Our path is together, Willa Boone. The rest we'll find along the way." Beneath the endless western stars, a widowed settler and a warrior of the plains sat side by side, two souls from worlds meant to collide, not unite. And yet, in that fragile peace between them, they had redrawn the map of what home could mean. Home was not land or tribe or border. It was the space between two hearts that had learned to see beyond fear. Finally, let me send my deep thanks to you. Thank you for listening, and for allowing this story to speak to your heart. The Wild West still holds countless truths, some painful, some tender, all worth remembering. Stay with us, subscribe, comment, and invite others to discover these untamed stories, from our hearts to yours. Thank you for being part of this journey. Aviso legal. Disclaimer. Each story shared here is produced for storytelling enjoyment. Certain scenes may include fictional or dramatized elements inspired by historical circumstances, although AI tools assist us in visuals, narration, and script development. The emotional tone, editing, and quality control are conducted by people to ensure meaningful experiences. We fully uphold YouTube's policies, using no deceptive recreations or impersonations of real individuals. All creative resources are properly licensed. Unauthorized copying, re-uploading, or remixing is not permitted. Thank you for supporting the effort behind every episode we create.